Welcome everyone to my channel, and what a strange breaking of the silence this must be for those who subscribed to my shall not be mentioned videos back in 2016. If by some miracle you happen to be one of those folk, apologies, but I will no longer be able to serve you the quality content I was before.
Why am I getting roasted?
No, what I'll be returning with is much, much different. As you likely surmised from the title, I am presenting today a pleasant bookbinding experience as I create a handmade and hand-bound commissioned book from scratch. You may be wondering what it is that I'm currently doing then, and saying to yourself that it certainly doesn't seem like I'm engaged in anything related to bookbinding whatsoever. To that I will explain. The client requested the following: a thick tome with handmade paper from scratch, consisting of signatures that alternate between handmade tea-stained and handmade white paper, with some pressed flower paper intermixed. The leather is to be a soft baby pink, complemented by a white quartz crystal inlaid on the center. Much of the rest was left up to my discretion, though during my process I kept the client updated on all the steps. I must begin with the paper. To do this, I tear up some classic printer copy paper and throw it in a blender along with the receipt I got from my Walmart purchase, since in this house we like recycling. The sheer amount of paper needed to fill the blender is something I always underestimate, since we'll be covering it with water and blending it into a thick, chunky, creamy pulp. I add a few squares of toilet paper for the nice butt-wiping softness. Next, of course, fill it with water. I've found that filling it completely to the top may cause some paper to go unblended if the blender you own was $4 from a used store and only requires about 12 watts to run. What I filled here was still a bit much. I've hand-picked my flowers, and thus they need to be pressed. Using a beautiful copy of an old hardcover storybook, I inlay flowers between sheets of parchment paper and press them into the protected pages. And now for my pulp bath. Fill it with water. Just kidding, the bin was dirty. Now fill it with water. The bin must be wide enough to fit my mold and decal, which you witnessed me so expertly stapling together at the beginning of this video. I'll be beginning with the tea-stained variety. To give it a bit of color preemptively, I've brewed some black tea, and will be adding it along with some baking soda to neutralize the pH. I'm swirling the tea bags around for no reason other than it's fun, and then I'm adding our juicy, succulent pulp. After this, some bookbinding glue to strengthen the pages a bit, and then you're going to want to give it a good healthy stir. To make handmade paper, you insert your mold and decal into the pulp bath, being sure to completely submerge it, for enough pulp to run over the top and settle down in, and then you can pull it out again. The upper frame of your mold and decal keeps the pulp formation rectangular, or rather paper-shaped, and once you pull it out of the bath, you can remove the top frame entirely. Using leftover mesh, I flip the mold upside down and begin to dry the wet pulp beneath these convenient blue shop towels I also got at Walmart from the receipt that I previously blended into the batch of pulp, Circle of Life. Once it's wrung dry of water, I very gently and delicately peel away the wire mesh from the pulp. I will admit, as smooth as I make it look here, it took a lot of practice, and I tore a lot of freshly squeezed pulp. And now, one of my favorite parts of the bookbinding process, tea-staining the pages. Here, I'm brewing some no-name brand classic black tea. I let it sit far longer than you would brew typical black tea for consumption, as I want a dark, rich color. And of course, a bit of baking soda for stabilization. I had a bit of tea left over from another batch, so I added that here. After pouring into a pan, it's time to soak and bake. With typical mixed media paper, I'm able to soak the pages for long periods to allow the colors to seep in. With handmade paper, paper created through a water-based process, I found I could only leave it in the tea for seconds before I began to fear my work would crumble before my eyes. However, everything worked out swimmingly, as somehow the color seeped in and created a rich and luscious brown after being cooked, and leaving out to dry into completion. Moving on to the second variety of paper, handmade white papers with some containing intermixed pressed flowers. I finally have the satisfaction of opening the pressed flowers, which is up there in my top 10 human experience sensations. This is my first time ever in my life making handmade paper, and it was a welcome challenge, but an incredibly tedious and fragile process. A tip I've picked up: you'll want to keep your decal clean. The more paper you make, the more buildup of pulp you get around your edges. This led to many papers getting stubbornly stuck on the mesh and tearing when I'd go about peeling. For adding the flowers, I tried to spread them out across the surface and mix them in with the pulp so they would not try to escape their new eternal prison. The blue shop towels are an incredible gift of mankind's engineering. If I squeeze them out and leave them to dry in the sun, they are reusable. Speaking as myself from the future, I've made paper many times since this first occasion, and I'm still using the same ones. Maybe eventually I'll blend them up and make some pleasant blue paper in a recycled shop towel paper book. At this point, all pages are completely dried, and I've left them in my high-tech book press to flatten somewhat. Now is for another one of my favorite parts, arranging and folding the signatures. The client wished for alternating signatures of tea-stained and white. I opted for signatures of 5 pages thick, with the flower paper sitting in the 3rd position of the white signatures, so that it would appear a couple of times across it. The paper ended up being significantly thicker than I'd previously imagined, and I found that I had some left over. I folded and stacked until the book reached a thickness the client desired. After this, I pressed them yet again before prepping for sewing. I use my own somewhat modified method of binding, known as case binding. This method consists of sewing around cloth or linen tapes that are spaced apart on the outside of the spine. I mark my holes for sewing and then punch through each signature in each hole individually with an awl. Some people prefer to saw their holes with a handsaw while they're pressed tightly in a book press. This is more efficient, yes, but it also requires you to have an actual legitimate book press, whereas mine only presses as heftily as my body weight when I stand atop it to tighten the screws, which I admit isn't very strong. For sewing, I'll use twill tapes that I purchased from the nearby craft store. I cut a very long piece of waxed thread and begin sewing by weaving in and out of each hole and affixing each signature to each other. I tend to prefer a single long piece of thread because I'm a perfectionist, which I'm aware complicates the process more than it would if I was just willing to sew another piece of thread onto the end of the previous one when it got short. Once reaching the end of the signatures, I now secure the spine by spreading PVA glue across some linen that will mold the curves of the signature and dry with some flexibility. I return it to the press so that it may dry how I desire. Sewing the headbands is a difficult part of the process to get footage of, but it consists of sewing embroidery thread around a leather cord that will sit up against the spine and provide some structure to the top and bottom of the text block where all signatures meet. For this book, I chose white and gold, the color of the quartz crystal, and the metallic accent color I'll be using. This part of the process requires quite a bit of fine motor skills if you choose to use thread as thin as I do, though others will use classic embroidery floss and it provides more ease. Now for removing the hardened spine from its place of rest, a party stack size Pringles can. It's the perfect curvature for this size, what do you want from me? For the covers, I use wood panels, which are harder to work with than regular cardboard, but I greatly enjoy the heaviness and thickness it gives a tome when completed. I use the backs of sketchbooks of paper for books past for the embossing layers. I don't have a laser cutter or anything fancy, so I cut it all out manually with a utility knife. For this book's design, I assembled a quadrant formation with an ovular inlay in the center to hold the gem. I roll out polymer clay and trace the shape of the gem onto it to give it a more personal area to be snug. I then bake the clay, the cover, and spine until it's solidified. I preemptively drill the holes for the rivets through the layers of wood and cardboard, as waiting for the leather to be on with such thick underlayers proves to be difficult. Finally, for the attachment of the leather. I start with small areas of the spine, coating with leather glue and then gently laying the leather across the top. It takes a lot of continuous working with both your fingers and a bone folder to get the leather to lay tightly against the embossed geometry. In this case, I was traveling and forgot my bone folder, so instead I made the smooth edge of a box cutter work. This will also explain the subpar camera work from this point on, my apologies. I like a good hollow spine. Therefore, I attach the text block by gluing down the twill tapes and overhanging linen directly to the cover interior, leaving the spine itself untouched. I attach black cardstock to seal in the tapes and linen and provide a smoother base to overlay the cover pages. One of the finishing touches is the ribbon bookmark. Made of synthetic materials, I'm able to cut a V shape into its bottom and lightly burn the edges to seal it from fraying. Now for the embellishments. I have gold corner protectors, which I reinforce with leather and superglue, and tighten to the corners. Additionally, I apply these elegant golden filigree decals. Then I hammer a nail through the previously drilled holes for the rivets. And the centerpiece, the quartz gem. I fortify it with superglue and leather glue and place it where it belongs. For the final touches, I paint on leafing adhesive in a simple ovular shape to complement the book's natural curves. I apply the gold leafing, pressing it on once it has been given time to dry, and then add my signature to the spine. And finally, I will reveal it in its true form. I don't break the spine in, as I firmly believe that's a privilege the owner of any new book should get to perform, so here it still seems somewhat stiff. However, it's complete. Time to package it up and send it off to its new home. Thank you for joining me and making it this far. I know this content is quite different from what I was doing originally, but I've been binding books for a few years now, and I wish to share it with anyone that might find some enjoyment out of seeing someone do it, like I do. But as I sit here writing this script, and the Baroque music playlist I'm listening to on YouTube reminds me I'm a deity reincarnated as a mortal on Earth that has just unfortunately remembered that fact, I'm happy to remark that I'll return with more artsy and variety content soon, and I look forward immensely to seeing what the future holds.